Hello, my name is Delara. Or at least, that's who I used to be, before my family erased me like I never existed. They didn't yell. They didn't slam doors. They just sent me away. To a snow-covered town I'd never heard of, with no return ticket, no explanation, just silence. I thought I was going there to heal. But they filed a death certificate behind my back. 10 years later, they showed up in my town, smiling, fundraising, pitching land that no longer belonged to them, and pretending I was still gone. But what happens when the daughter you buried on paper stands up in court? What happens when the one you called dead comes back with everything? Do they even remember why they did it? Or did they really believe their own lie? It's strange how quickly people forget the truth when it's more convenient to rewrite it. 10 years ago, on the morning of my mother's 65th birthday, the sun rose too warmly for a January day in Pasadena. The air smelled of trimmed rose bushes and over-chlorinated pool water. The garden had been prepped for weeks, every rose polished, every hedge perfectly clipped for family photos that would later grace charity programs and lifestyle magazines. I remember standing in the kitchen, drying dishes because the caterer was late, and Verena, my mother, didn't want fingerprints on the champagne flutes. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Just stay in here until we've started the pictures, all right?" That was her way of saying, "Don't ruin the image." So I stayed. I wiped counters that were already spotless. I arranged hors d'oeuvres on crystal trays like a servant in my own home. Then I heard it, glass shattering and a thud heavy enough to silence the music. I dropped the tray and rushed to the hall. There she was, Aisling, my niece, lying crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. Her little legs twisted beneath her. She was screaming, but the sound was distant, like I'd gone underwater. Lucan yelled, "Where the hell were you?" I was still holding a towel. I said, "I didn't see her fall." But no one listened. Celine gasped dramatically, cradling her daughter. She was alone. Where was Delara? Isolde stepped in, that calm venom in her voice. "You're the last person who saw her. She was upstairs 5 minutes ago." They all turned to me like I was holding a smoking gun. I remember Verena standing beside the fireplace. She didn't say a word, not to defend me, not to question them. That silence still echoes louder than any accusation. Later that night, I heard murmurs coming from the study, my name over and over again. "She's unstable, always too quiet. It's just a matter of time before something else happens." I wasn't invited to that family meeting, but I walked in anyway. They stopped talking. My father, Gareth, had his lawyer voice on. "Delara, sweetheart, we're thinking it may be best for everyone's peace of mind if you took a little break." "Somewhere restful." "A break?" I asked. Lucan chimed in, smug. "Just until things settle down. There's a retreat in Montana. Snow. Quiet." Celine nodded, eyes fake soft. "We already booked it for you. Think of it as self-care." "Self-care?" I repeated. I laughed once. "You think I hurt Aisling?" Isolde answered for them. "You didn't stop it." And that was the verdict. No trial, no defense. By morning, a one-way ticket had been placed on my nightstand, along with a prepaid debit card holding $50. My bags were already packed. I stood at the front door of the house I grew up in, holding a suitcase I hadn't touched, staring at people who looked relieved I was leaving. Verena kissed my cheek like a politician. "Be well," she said, like I was a guest. No one hugged me. The flight was delayed due to a snowstorm. I spent 7 hours in a cold terminal watching families huddle together. I had no one to text. I turned my phone off. When I arrived in Redwater, Montana, it was pitch black. The air cut my skin with every step. A man named Ray drove me to the cabin they'd rented. He didn't say much, but before leaving, he handed me a single key and muttered, "Don't wait too long to get out of here." Inside, the cabin smelled like mildew and mothballs. The fridge was empty except for bottled water and expired yogurt. Cans of soup lined one shelf. No heat. The bed was hard. There was no itinerary, no "see you soon." On the second day, my phone died. I asked the clerk at the general store if he could charge it. He shrugged. "Power goes out a lot this time of year. Most folks don't stay long." When I checked again the next day, the phone still wouldn't turn on. And that was when it hit me. There had never been a plan for me to come back. I spent hours sitting on the porch steps, watching snow pile higher than the mailbox. No texts, no calls, not even spam. They didn't send me away to rest. They sent me here to disappear. By the end of the week, I rationed what was left of the canned food. The silence inside the cabin began to hum with voices I hadn't heard in years. My mother calling my name in a dream, Lucan yelling over a broken lamp, Isolde saying, "She's just jealous." My skin turned red from the cold. I wrapped myself in every layer I had, but it wasn't enough. The gaps in the windows whistled with wind. I stuffed towels around them, burned old magazines in the fireplace, but they did little. I remember finding the photo in my coat pocket, a snapshot from my 12th birthday. I had frosting on my nose, and Verena was laughing, arm around my shoulders. For a moment, I felt something like warmth. I stared at that photo for a long time before realizing what was missing. It wasn't the laugh, it wasn't the cake, it was realness. Even then, we were performing. I wrote my first journal entry on a napkin. I think they want me dead, not violently, just quietly. On day 11, the food was nearly gone. I'd stopped feeling hunger. That scared me more than anything. I stood by the window, watching the snow fall in sheets. My reflection stared back at me, hollowed eyes, cracked lips. I opened the window slightly, hoping for fresh air. The cold hit me like a slap. A single snowflake landed on my eyelashes. It melted instantly. And in that moment, I realized it melted faster than my family's love. The ash from that photograph still clung to my fingertips when I woke up. My body ached with the kind of fatigue that seeps into your bones, not from labor, but from being forgotten. I sat up slowly, wrapped in every piece of clothing I could find, and stared at the frost trailing across the cabin window like delicate cracks in glass. Someone knocked. The sound startled me. It was the first real knock I'd heard in days. My legs were stiff as I moved toward the door, heart thudding. When I opened it, a woman stood there, bundled in a faded parka, holding a brown paper bag. Her hair was gray, tucked into a thick knitted cap. She didn't smile. "Said to drop this off here," she murmured, placing the bag in my arms. "Didn't leave a name. Just said it was for the girl in the snow cabin." I blinked. "Did he say where he was from?" She shook her head. "Didn't say much. Just handed it off." I nodded, and she left without another word. Inside the bag, a loaf of bread, a small thermos of soup, and a folded note with nothing written on it. I didn't eat right away. I sat by the table, tracing the edge of the thermos, trying to picture who would leave food without asking questions. Who even knew I was here? By the time I finished the soup, it was nearly dark. I decided to check my bank account again. I powered on the old prepaid phone that still barely held a charge. I logged into the banking app. The screen spun, then flashed. "Account not found." I tried again. Same message. Frustrated, I called the customer service number, my hands trembling slightly. The voice on the other end asked for verification. I gave my name, my birth date, my social security number. Pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the woman said. "There's no account matching that information. Are you sure you entered it correctly?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm sure." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched snow pile against the door, listened to the wind creep in through the corners, and wondered just how far they were willing to go. The next morning, I bundled myself up and walked into town. Redwater wasn't big. Just one main road with a diner, a town hall, a gas station, and a small DMV office squeezed into a corner of the municipal building. I walked into the office, hoping to verify my ID. The woman behind the desk looked up, brows arched. "Need to renew a license?" "No. Just, can you pull up my file?" She asked for my info. I gave it. She typed, frowned, typed again. "You said your name was Delara Wynne Vexler." I nodded. She leaned back, unease flickering across her face. "There's nothing here." "What do you mean, nothing?" "It's like someone initiated a legal closure. Your record's blank. There's no photo, no address, no status. It's like you died, or never existed. The floor tilted beneath me. What about Social Security, medical, anything? She shook her head. I'm sorry. I left without saying much else. The walk back felt longer. My knees ached, my breath came in shallow bursts. By the time I reached the cabin, my hands were numb and I couldn't unclench my fists. Later that week, I walked to the library. It was small, but warm. I sat at one of the old computers and searched the one place I hadn't dared to look before, the Wexler Foundation. Their website loaded slowly on the outdated machine. There it was, my family's carefully curated legacy. Glossy photos of banquets, speeches, charity galas, Celine smiling with politicians, Lucan shaking hands with donors. My father holding a plaque. My mother, still impeccable, offering a dignified smile. And Isolde. She stood at the center, hands clasped in front of her, wearing the same icy expression I remembered from childhood. I clicked on the About Us page. There were only 4 of them listed. No mention of me, not even a footnote. The family portrait, the one that used to hang in the living room, was there. Except this time, it had been altered. I wasn't in it. It was seamless, almost expert-level cropping. You'd never know I was once between Lucan and Isolde, holding my father's arm. Underneath the image, a quote from Isolde. We were once 5, now we are 4. Some paths diverge for the better. I couldn't breathe. I rushed into the library's bathroom, locked the stall door, and slid to the floor. The tile was freezing against my thighs, but I couldn't move. My chest tightened with something that wasn't quite sadness. It was more like being erased slowly while still conscious. The door creaked. A small voice asked, "Are you lost, lady?" I turned my head. A girl, no older than 6, peered at me, wide-eyed, holding a library card. I smiled, barely. I think I've been lost for a long time. She tilted her head and walked away. That night, I pulled out my journal. I wrote in big letters, each stroke harder than the last. No name, no face, no proof. I could disappear, and they'd say I never existed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I opened my box of keepsakes, the few things I had. Inside was the photo from my 12th birthday, the same one I found in my coat pocket. I held it over the fireplace for a long time, hand shaking. Then I let it fall into the flames. I didn't cry, but I watched every corner curl, watched my face vanish into black ash. As the embers died, something shifted in me. A quiet click, like a door finally locking shut. If they wouldn't let me carry my name, I'd build a new one they couldn't take. When I woke that morning, something was different. I wasn't shaking. My body still ached, but there was clarity in the cold air, like the snow had finally stopped spinning long enough for me to see where I stood. I dressed slowly, layered in what little I had. Then I opened the cabin door and stepped outside. The wind had calmed. The landscape lay blanketed in silence, save for the crunch of ice beneath my boots as I moved toward the main road, unsure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stay locked in that cabin another day. My head pounded from hunger, but it was the noise inside my chest, the echo of being erased, that truly rattled me. I made it maybe a quarter mile before my legs gave out. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the snow. I was in someone's home. Soft yellow light spilled from a lamp on the nightstand. I was wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. I heard the creak of floorboards, then a voice, low, weathered, kind, but careful. "You're lucky I was out walking the fence line," she said. "Could have frozen to death 10 steps from the road." I turned my head slowly. A woman stood near the doorway, holding a mug. Her hair was gray and pinned up. She wore a thick sweater and jeans that had seen years of garden soil. "I'm Esther," she said. "You don't have to talk. Just rest. We'll figure out the rest later." Her kindness made me suspicious. That's what happens when the people who were supposed to love you use that same tone before pushing you into the cold. "Why did you help me?" I asked hoarsely. She looked at me long and hard, then sat down across the room. "Because," she said simply, "I knew your mother." It was the first time I'd heard someone say that name without pity or scorn in years. "You knew Verena?" I asked, already bracing for the lie. She shook her head. No. I knew Mira. That was her name before she married into, well, that family. I blinked. She and I were teachers once, Esther continued. She used to write in journals, said it helped her keep the noise out. When you were born, she told me she wanted to raise a daughter who didn't need a man's name to survive. I swallowed, slowly sitting up. What happened to her? Esther didn't answer right away. She stood, walked over to a drawer in the hallway, and returned with a cloth-wrapped bundle. She left this with me, she said. Told me to give it to you if things ever turned. My fingers trembled as I untied the bundle. Inside was a weathered leather journal. The pages smelled faintly of lavender. On the inside cover, in my mother's careful handwriting, it read, "If they ever turn on her, I hope she finds this. My Delara, don't let them erase you." I turned the pages slowly, taking in the slanted script, the sketches of garden plans, quotes from old books, and memories too specific to be anything but true. She knew, I whispered. She knew what they'd do. Esther nodded. She saw it coming. That family, your family, they were always more concerned with how things looked than how things were. My chest felt like it had cracked open. For the first time in weeks, the tears came, hot, sharp, and not from the cold. Esther didn't interrupt. She just left me with the journal and stepped into the kitchen to make tea. Later that night, after she'd shown me to a spare room and I'd taken my first hot shower in weeks, I sat at a small desk and pulled out a pen. The journal lay open beside me, but what I was about to write didn't belong in it. I reached for a blank envelope from the drawer and wrote 4 words on the outside, "For the Vexler estate." Inside, I placed a single sheet of paper, typed in bold with no signature. I'm alive. I remember everything. Sleep tight. I mailed it the next morning. No return address. Esther watched me walk back from the mailbox, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Was that necessary? She asked. They need to know the snow didn't bury me. She didn't smile, but she didn't stop me either. Over the next few weeks, I slowly rebuilt from what was left. I helped Esther with chores. She taught me how to sew buttons properly, how to budget on a fixed income, how to preserve jam in the winter, and how to be invisible when it mattered most. I started volunteering at the local pantry. Quiet, helpful, anonymous. No one asked questions. I learned names, routines, faces. I became Laura to them, no longer Delara. No more Vexler. Just someone who worked hard and didn't ask for much. Some nights I stayed up reading my mother's journal, piecing together the woman I'd never fully known. She had doubts, she had regrets, but she had love too. Fierce, unshakable love for a daughter who never got to see that side of her. I should have taught her to fight louder, she wrote in one entry, but maybe silence will be her sword. I underlined that line and read it every morning. One night, as the fireplace crackled low, Esther and I sat in quiet comfort. She sipped her tea and I mended a sleeve on one of her cardigans. You've got hands that know how to heal, she said, only because I had to learn how to repair what they broke. She set her cup down and turned to me. You'll rise from this, she said. But remember, power comes quietly, no fanfare, no flashing lights. It comes in choosing to stay standing. I nodded. They buried me in snow, I whispered, not knowing I was seed. Esther and I didn't say much after that town hall meeting. The wind outside was biting, but neither of us rushed for the truck. We walked in silence, boots crunching through old snow. That kind of silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that carries weight, like a shared understanding between two people who've seen too much and said too little for too long. Once we got home, I hung my coat by the door and stood in the entryway for a moment, taking in the warmth of the place. The fireplace crackled gently, and the scent of wood smoke clung to the air, grounding me. Esther poured us both some tea and handed me a cup without a word. She knew better than to ask what I was thinking. I sat down at the small round table we always used for dinner. I stared at the steam rising from my cup and finally whispered, "They didn't even look at me." Esther pulled out her chair and settled in. Because they've rewritten the story so many times, they don't know what the truth looks like anymore. I nodded. They laughed. They smiled. They played the part. That's all they've ever done. The next morning came faster than I expected. I was up before sunrise, putting together the supply list for the workshop. I ran a small program now, basic budgeting and job skills for women trying to rebuild their lives. I'd started it quietly, using the community hall on Saturday mornings and Wednesday afternoons. No flyers, no big announcements. Just word of mouth and women showing up because they heard someone finally saw them. They called me Laura. No one asked where I came from, and I didn't offer it. The new name sat comfortably on my shoulders, light, but not without memory. That afternoon, as I was tidying up the room after a budgeting session, Esther poked her head in. "General store. Thought you'd want to hear it from me." I put the broom down. "They're here?" I asked. She nodded slowly. Lucan, Isolde, Celine, Gareth, whole bunch, said they're in town for business. Something about municipal leases. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. It had been almost a decade since I heard their names spoken aloud with such casual certainty. "What kind of business?" I asked. "Lucan's pitching a land development deal. They want to lease property, turn part of the South Fields into a legacy retreat." My chest went cold. That land had once belonged to Esther's husband, passed down through her family for generations. Esther must have seen my expression shift because she added, "They don't know it's me behind it. I've kept quiet." I looked at her. "Let's keep it that way." We drove to the town hall together the next morning. The place was fuller than usual, chairs set up in neat rows, residents murmuring quietly to one another. The council table at the front was covered with folders, land maps, and a thermos someone had clearly brought from home. I wore a plain navy coat, my hair tucked under a gray knit cap. I stood near the back, half hidden behind a wooden support beam. Then they entered. First came Lucan, carrying himself like a man still chasing the memory of power. His tie was too tight, his smile too wide. Celine followed, heels clicking against the tile like punctuation marks, loud, sharp, self-important. Isolde came in last, perfectly composed, dressed like she still believed the world needed her approval. Gareth trailed behind them, moving slower, grayer than I remembered. Not one of them saw me, not a flicker of recognition. Lucan took center stage as if it were his birthright. He began his pitch with that smug tone I'd memorized from too many family dinners. "We believe Redwater is an untapped gem," he said, spreading his arms wide like he was presenting salvation itself. "A perfect location for a healing retreat, a place where legacy meets landscape." Celine nodded from her seat, chiming in at the right moments. "We want to honor the town's roots while also moving it forward. We'll bring jobs, we'll bring prestige." It was rehearsed, polished, empty. Esther stood beside me, arms folded. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. I shook my head, eyes fixed on Lucan. "He's lying." She turned slightly. "What do you mean?" I pointed to the slide projected on the screen, an outline of the proposed development site. "That parcel he's talking about. It's not unclaimed. It's yours. That title passed through probate 10 years ago." Esther narrowed her eyes. "So he's selling what isn't his?" "Exactly." The meeting moved on, but I barely heard the rest. I was already somewhere else, 10 years ago, standing in our family's dining room, listening to them decide my fate as if I wasn't there. I could feel the old wound split open, not in pain, but in clarity, the kind that sharpens your focus. I looked at them, dressed in carefully chosen outfits, smiling for a town they didn't know and never cared to, and I thought, they buried me here, but they don't realize they're standing on the grave. When the council dismissed the meeting, people began filing out. I stayed in place, waiting for them to pass. Isolde walked within 5 feet of me, chatting with someone from the zoning office. Her laugh hadn't changed, neither had the way she tilted her head when she wanted people to believe she was listening. She walked right past, didn't flinch, didn't pause, didn't recognize me. Neither did Celine, who brushed past with a "sorry" that meant nothing. Gareth didn't look up from the floor. Lucan was still talking loudly behind them, joking about legacy and land like it was his to give. I clenched my coat in my fists. Esther leaned in, her voice barely audible. You're stronger than their memory of you. I exhaled slowly. We waited until the hallway cleared. Outside, the temperature had dropped, but the air was still. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the snow. I stood on the curb beside Esther, watching the Vexillers climb into their rented SUV. She asked, "What are you thinking?" I turned to her, jaw set. "They came for land," I said, "but they don't know they're standing on a minefield." I didn't wait long after the town hall meeting. Esther and I returned to her house that evening, neither of us saying much on the drive back. The heater in her truck worked, but barely. The silence between us was thick, not uncomfortable, but full. She knew I was already working out the next move. She also knew not to interrupt me while I did. The following morning, I rose before the sun, pulled on my boots, and stepped into the small utility room behind the kitchen. A dusty filing cabinet sat in the corner. Esther had told me once that her late husband kept records of everything: deeds, receipts, even letters from the zoning board dated back to the 1970s. It didn't take long to find what I needed. A folder marked Land Transfer, Blaine to Win. Inside was a notarized record of the title transfer, fully legal, signed and sealed 5 years ago. The land the Vexillers were trying to pitch as available. It had been mine for years. They just didn't know it. I stared at the signature on the deed. Mine. The real me. Delara Wynne Vexiller. I hadn't used my full name in almost a decade. Seeing it in ink made something tighten in my chest, like I was staring at a ghost version of myself, one I wasn't sure I wanted back, but needed. After breakfast, I called the municipal board. I asked for the clerk who had handled Lucan's proposal. When he came to the line, I spoke slowly and clearly. My name is Delara Wynne Vexiller. I'm calling to inform you that the parcel of land under discussion belongs to me. A pause. I'm sorry. Did you say? I have the deed. The land was transferred legally 5 years ago to me by Esther Blaine, the original owner. Another pause. Then, would you be willing to bring in that documentation? I'd like to be present at the next board meeting as a stakeholder, I said. I have a right to speak. He stammered for a moment before assuring me he'd add my name to the docket. By the next day, word had made its way around town. I knew because the stares changed. They weren't pitying anymore. They were curious, cautious. People greeted me with nods that lingered, as if trying to place my face. You're Lara, right? A woman at the grocery store asked. You teach that budgeting class? Yes. She tilted her head. Funny, you look a lot like someone I remember from… Well, never mind. I just smiled. Later that afternoon, Esther returned from the hardware store with her lips pressed tight. They know, she said, setting down a bag of light bulbs. Or they've started guessing. Who told them? No one had to. The council clerk's wife plays cards with Celine's hairdresser. Of course. Let them wonder, I said. They still don't know what's coming. At the next board meeting, I arrived early. I wore black slacks and a simple gray sweater, no jewelry, no makeup. I didn't want to distract from the facts. I sat 2 rows from the front, my folder in my lap, back straight. The Vexillers arrived minutes before it started. Lucan walked in first, checking his watch like he was late for a luncheon. Celine followed, whispering something sharp into his ear. Isolde trailed, scanning the room as if trying to spot a virus in her clean environment. Gareth brought up the rear, slower than usual, eyes downcast. They didn't see me at first, not really. Then Isolde's gaze landed on me. She blinked once, then again. Her jaw clenched. She turned to Gareth. I saw the way she grabbed his arm, tight, controlled. He glanced up, followed her eyes, and his face froze. The meeting began with procedural notes. Then came land use. When they opened the floor, I stood. I'm Delara Wynne Vexiller, I said, voice calm but loud enough to carry. And I have something to clarify. All heads turned. Lucan's hand tightened around his folder. Celine's smile faltered. Gareth looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. Isolde didn't blink. I stepped forward, handed the deed to the clerk, and turned to face them directly. The land you're proposing to develop doesn't belong to the town, I said. It belongs to me. A collective inhale filled the room. Lucan started to speak, but I raised a hand. I have lived in Redwater under another name for the last several years. Quietly. I've watched you pretend I didn't exist. I've read the articles. I've seen the family portrait where I was cropped out. But the law doesn't operate on fiction, and this document proves ownership. The council members looked over the papers, whispering among themselves. Gareth cleared his throat. I don't know what this is about, he said, eyes darting nervously. But my daughter, Delara, passed away years ago. That's when the room truly stilled. I turned to him. You didn't lose a daughter, I said. You discarded her. Gasps. Celine rose to her feet. Delara? I nodded once. Gareth opened his mouth again, then closed it. The mask slipped for just a second. Lucan stepped forward. You disappeared, he said, voice rising. We thought— No, I interrupted. You decided. The council president stood, trying to regain order. Miss Wexler, are you saying you are the legal owner of this land? Yes, and I have the full supporting documentation. He looked at the papers again, then at Lucan. You didn't disclose this? Lucan stammered. We were told it was available. The owner had passed. I'm not dead, I said quietly. I'm just inconvenient. The room exploded in murmurs. Celine stormed out first, her heels clacking down the hall. Lucan stayed rooted to the floor, lips pressed together. Gareth sat down heavily. Isolde looked at me. For the first time in a decade, her voice held no venom. This changes everything, she said. No, I replied. It reveals everything. The meeting adjourned soon after. As I walked out, someone touched my arm. Miss Wynne, a voice said softly. I turned to see a woman from the local bakery. You're remarkable. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. I didn't return home right after the meeting. I needed air. Not the kind you breathe in with shallow lungs, but the kind that fills you in places nothing else can. I drove past the cabin, past Esther's workshop, and out toward the ridge where the Blaine property meets the county road. The trees there aren't tall, but they stand together in a quiet kind of dignity. I pulled the truck over and sat still, watching wind ripple through the brush and snow gather along the fence posts. They knew now. They saw me, but that didn't mean they'd stop. When I finally came back to the house, Esther was in the kitchen, kneading dough with a focus that suggested she, too, needed to keep her hands busy. She didn't look up. You did good, she said. I leaned against the counter and poured myself some tea. They're not going to let this go quietly. No. But neither will you. It wasn't even 2 days later when the first letter arrived. A thick envelope, no return address, hand-delivered by a courier who didn't bother with small talk. Inside, a formal notice from a national bank, alerting me to a defaulted business loan. Not just any loan, one issued under the name Delara Wynne Wexler, my name, my social security number, my signature, forged in an old style I hadn't used since college. The amount was staggering. I stared at the papers in disbelief. There it was, Lucan's business name, listed in the partnership field. The transaction date was nearly 2 years after they'd sent me away. So this wasn't just greed. It was premeditated theft. I folded the papers neatly and placed them in a folder. Then I picked up my phone and called Linda Hargrove, a lawyer I'd met through Esther's church. She was in her late 50s, tough as nails, and not afraid to ruffle feathers. Fraud, she said, her voice sharp. Open and shut, especially if they faked your signature and profited from it. Do I need to go to the police first? You need to get ahead of it. File an injunction now. We'll go through the fraud division at the state level. They won't see it coming. Linda sent me a checklist of documents and affidavits. I stayed up all night compiling every file, every screenshot, every notarized deed Esther had kept. I copied my journal pages where I documented the harassment, the silence, the exile. I wasn't just building a legal defense. I was building a weapon. A few days later, I walked into the community center for a town charity event. Nothing major, just some booths, a bake sale, and a silent auction. I was there to drop off a batch of knitted scarves some of the workshop women had made. Then I saw her, Celine. She stood near the auction table, laughing with a couple of women from the church. Her nails were perfect, her lipstick just a little too red for Montana in winter, and pinned to her coat was something that stopped me cold, a sapphire brooch, oval cut, silver filigree. My mother's. It had been mine. It was supposed to be mine. Promised to me the night before I left. Left sitting on the dresser in the guest room, wrapped in a handkerchief, next to the letter Verena never finished writing. Celine noticed me staring. She touched the brooch casually. "Oh, this?" she said to the group, loud enough for me to hear. "Mother gave it to me as a gift, right after my engagement. Always said it should go to the daughter who kept her name proud." I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked straight out into the cold, and didn't stop walking until I reached Esther's truck. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and let the silence press against me. They didn't just want me erased, they wanted my memories replaced. Back at home, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. Even my memories. They tried to steal. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just turned the page and started planning. The next morning, I dressed in my best black coat and took the bus into Helena. At the State Fraud Division office, I handed over my evidence in a sealed envelope. The woman at the front desk read my name twice. "Delara Wynne Vexler?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "You're the one they said was dead." I looked her in the eye. "Not anymore." That afternoon, I made a call to a local journalist named Janice Finch. She'd written a piece last year about a woman whose estranged husband emptied their joint accounts while she was in hospice. "This story is bigger," I told her. "How big?" "It's about stolen names, stolen land, stolen daughters." A pause. Then, "Can we meet?" "Soon," I said. "But not yet." That night, I sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by folders and envelopes. Esther brought me tea and didn't ask questions. She just set the cup down gently beside me and said, "You're almost ready." "I'm tired," I admitted, "but not done." And I wasn't, not by a long shot. The next day, I stood at the base of the courthouse steps in Helena, folder tucked under my arm, coat buttoned up to the neck. The sky was the kind of gray that pressed low, like it wanted to keep you from looking up. But I looked up anyway. "They thought I'd be too quiet," I said aloud. "Too broken." I stepped forward. They were wrong. It was barely sunrise when Linda's email came through. I was sitting at the table, steam rising from my coffee, Esther still asleep in the next room. I opened the message on my tablet, expecting routine updates. Paperwork filed, meeting requests sent. Instead, the subject line made my breath catch. "You need to see this." Attached was a scan from a 2017 Pasadena obituary. Black and white, plain as day. Delara Wynne Vexler, age 26, passed peacefully in her sleep. A private ceremony was held with close family members. She will be missed. I reread it 3 times before I spoke. "Private ceremony?" I whispered aloud. And then, the signature beneath the death notice. Gareth Vexler, next of kin. I sat there, stunned, coffee going cold in my hands. They hadn't just pushed me out, they buried me, legally, publicly. Esther came into the kitchen not long after. She paused when she saw me, noticed the expression on my face. "What happened?" I turned the screen toward her. "Apparently, I died 6 years ago." She set down the tea tin she was holding. "They filed an obituary?" I nodded slowly. "Not just that. Gareth signed it. They held a private ceremony. That's how they shifted everything to Isolde. My accounts, my trust, my name." Esther pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, mouth tight, eyes hard. "They couldn't just forget you. They had to make sure no one else remembered you either." Linda called later that morning, voice sharper than usual. "The death certificate is real," she confirmed, "filed through the California Office of Vital Records. But here's where it gets interesting. Your name is still active in federal databases. They never completed the cross-check. Which means we have legal contradiction, and that's gold. So, what does that mean for me? It means your identity still exists, and they've used it, which makes everything they've done, every loan, every transfer, subject to federal fraud review. You want to take this public? I paused, staring out the window at the snow-covered yard. Yes, I said. I think it's time. The next day, while Esther baked bread and the sun thawed icicles off the porch rail, I dug deeper into records. I pulled old property files, insurance statements, digital backups of every email I'd ever sent my family. That's when I found her, Aisling, my niece. But not by that name anymore. I searched her school district, found the latest yearbook scans. Her face was the same, those wide brown eyes, that mischievous smirk, but the name beneath the photo read, Ashlyn Ray Morrison. Morrison, Celine's married name. Not a single mention of me, not in school emergency contacts, not in parent forms, nowhere. Then I found the blog, Celine's lifestyle page, Mothering with Morrison. It was the usual curated nonsense, smoothie recipes, parenting hacks, thinly veiled humble brags about charity work. But buried in a post from 5 years ago, I saw the words that almost made me drop the tablet. My sister died when we were young. I still hear her laugh sometimes. It wasn't just erasure, it was performance. A sob story packaged for likes and sympathy. A family tragedy made content-friendly. I let out a scream, a full guttural cry I hadn't made since the first winter in Redwater, the kind that starts in the stomach and claws its way out. Esther found me crumpled on the floor of my bedroom. She didn't say anything, just sat down beside me and pulled me into her arms. They had rewritten everything, even my grief, even the parts that belonged to me. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, they didn't just want me gone. They wanted my ghost to serve them. My silence became their storyline. It was the final push I needed. The next morning, I printed every page of evidence. I wrote a concise summary. I labeled folders. I cross-referenced dates. Then I drove to Helena and walked into the State Attorney General's office. I told the receptionist I had a file to submit for a case of ongoing high-level identity fraud and inheritance manipulation. She didn't ask questions, just took the folder, time-stamped it, and placed it in a basket labeled Urgent Review. That afternoon, I made one last call. I used an old prepaid phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 10 years. It rang 4 times before the voicemail clicked on. Isolde's voice was just as smooth as I remembered. You've reached Isolde Wexler. Leave a message or email me directly. I waited for the beep. If I was dead, I said slowly, how are you hearing my voice? Pause. Let's meet in court. Then I hung up. That night, Esther and I had dinner in quiet, both of us knowing things had shifted again. She poured wine. I stared at the flickering candle between us and said, they built their lives on the idea that I'd never come back. They forgot one thing, Esther replied. You never really left. At dawn the next day, the headline broke. Wexler family accused of identity fraud, illegal inheritance claims. It was all over local news, then regional, then national. The town buzzed. At the bakery, people whispered in line. At the library, eyes followed me through the stacks. Some folks avoided me altogether. Others nodded, whispered, good for you, when they passed. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By noon, 3 reporters had called the community center asking to speak with Miss Wexler. I didn't take the calls. Instead, I stood in the doorway of the workshop, snow falling in quiet sheets, the air thick with something electric. They killed me on paper, I whispered. I looked down at the folder still in my hand, the one I never let out of my sight. Now I'll bury their lies. By the time the courthouse doors opened that morning, a small crowd had already gathered. They weren't loud. This wasn't the kind of place for shouting or spectacle, but they stared, they whispered, and they waited. I walked up the stone steps of the courthouse in Helena with my head high, the folder pressed close to my chest. The air was sharp, laced with winter's leftover bite. Snow melted in patches along the sidewalk, leaving damp trails like old scars. Inside, everything was colder, not because of the temperature, but because of the people, lawyers in crisp suits, reporters with notepads clutched tight, town officials with forced smiles, and sitting quietly in the third row, my family, Lucan, arms folded. Celine, checking her reflection in the blank screen of her phone. Gareth, smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of his own choices had finally settled into his bones. And then Isolde, back straight, face unreadable. Her eyes flicked toward me once, and then away. Esther sat beside me. She didn't say much on the drive over. She didn't need to. When the judge entered, the room shifted. People straightened. Phones went away. The usual ceremonial words were exchanged, and then the clerk read the case aloud. The matter of Dilara Wynne Vexler. Allegations of identity fraud, false death certification, illegal inheritance transfers, and business loan impersonation. I stood when called. My voice didn't shake. My name is Dilara Wynne Vexler, I said. Gasps rippled across the room, a wave of disbelief meeting reality. Even now, even with all the headlines and documents, hearing the name from my own lips forced people to reckon with the fact that I wasn't a rumor. I was standing right in front of them. 10 years ago, I continued, my family declared me dead. Not legally at first, emotionally, socially, spiritually. They buried me in silence. They filed paperwork that ensured I'd lose access to my accounts, my name, my past. They held a funeral I wasn't invited to. They moved on. The judge nodded. We acknowledge your standing, Miss Vexler. Let's begin. Linda, my attorney, stood next. Her pace was steady. She didn't perform. She didn't need to. She presented facts, dates, signatures, bank transfers, property deeds, medical record gaps, school forms with my niece's name changed, a forged death certificate, everything. By the time she finished, the room wasn't whispering anymore. It was holding its breath. Celine looked pale. Lucan stared at the floor. Gareth blinked rapidly like he couldn't focus. Isolde still didn't move, but I could see her throat tighten, the corners of her eyes twitch. Then came the ruling. The judge's voice was calm, methodical. Based on the evidence submitted, the court rules in favor of Miss Vexler. Lucan flinched. The Blaine estate land shall be returned to its rightful ownership under the last verified legal deed, listing Dilara Wynne Vexler as sole inheritor. Any attempt to lease, develop, or repurpose said land in the last 10 years is hereby nullified. Celine exhaled sharply, a sound more like a whimper than a sigh. As for the fraudulent business loan acquired using the identity of Miss Vexler, all financial responsibility is to be transferred to Lucan Vexler, the co-applicant and beneficiary. Gareth slumped further in his seat. Celine Morrison is to be charged separately with document falsification related to the submission of inheritance documents during probate proceedings. That matter will be referred to the district attorney's office. Finally, the judge turned to Isolde. As for Miss Isolde Vexler, your involvement in misrepresenting your sister's status to financial institutions and your professional clients may not be criminal, but it is unethical. The court is submitting findings to the Public Relations Ethics Board and the State Licensing Committee. For the first time in the hearing, Isolde blinked. The judge tapped the gavel once. Case closed. And just like that, the room erupted. Cameras clicked. Reporters jumped to their feet. The noise became a blur. I didn't move. Esther touched my hand. I looked at her, and she gave a slight nod. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't victory in the way movies show it. It was release. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall again. Light, gentle, unthreatening. A reporter called out as I descended the stairs. Miss Vexler, do you want revenge? I paused. No, I said simply. I wanted the truth. Another camera flashed. And now that you have it? Someone else shouted. I turned, looked directly into the lens of a camera I knew would be broadcasting my face to thousands, maybe millions. Now I'll plant something better in the ground where they buried me. I turned and walked down the rest of the steps. Esther followed, silent as always. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because for the first time in years, I had space to think about a future that wasn't wrapped in shadows. I opened my journal and wrote, "They thought a lie could become my headstone, but I built a life from that soil instead." 2 weeks after the trial, Esther died in her sleep. No warning, no dramatics. Just a quiet sigh sometime after midnight. I found her in the morning, still warm, her hands folded over a quilt she'd sewn herself years ago. The window next to her bed was cracked open an inch, just like she always left it, even in winter. I didn't cry right away. I made her tea out of habit before remembering. I cleaned the dishes she left from the night before. I called the town doctor, who came without sirens or ceremony and handled things the way small towns do when they lose someone everybody knew, but nobody could replace. She left everything to me. The will was handwritten, notarized, and stored in the same drawer where she kept her wedding band, a packet of seed catalogs, and an old letter my mother had once sent her. "To Delara," it began. "Because names can be taken, but truth returns." She gave me the land, the house, the journals, the photo albums, even the cranky old truck with the dented passenger door. All of it came with no conditions. I placed a photo of Esther and my mother on the mantel, one from years ago, both women younger, arms linked, laughing in a garden that no longer exists. I whispered into the stillness, "You remembered me when no one else did." And in that quiet, I felt something settle inside me. Later that week, the sentencing hearings were held. I didn't attend, not because I forgave them, and not because I was above it, but because I had nothing left to say to people who never once listened when I spoke. Gareth didn't appear in court. He was too unwell, according to his lawyer. Lucan declared bankruptcy and left town with nothing but a duffel bag and a pair of sunglasses he refused to take off, even indoors. Celine's boutique closed. Her social media went dark. No more sponsored wellness tips or blog posts about how to love your life with grace and gratitude. Her grace, like everything else, was rented. And Isolde? She was last seen in a hospital across the state line, brought in alone after collapsing at a hotel bar. No ID, no emergency contact. Staff marked her intake file as unknown relative status. None of them spoke my name, and I didn't need them to. Instead, I took a piece of the settlement money and started something that mattered. I called it the Win Trust. It wasn't flashy, no billboard, no press release, just a small office above the Redwater Post Office and a website with one mission: to provide microgrants and legal resources for women who'd been erased by their families, financially, emotionally, or legally. We helped them file restraining orders, apply for scholarships, write affidavits, find a safe place to sleep. I hired 2 women from the workshop to help manage intake calls, and I ran literacy sessions every Wednesday evening, teaching women how to read fine print on contracts, how to spot hidden clauses, how to tell their story without asking permission. Some days were hard. Some women came in and couldn't speak at all, which is how I met her. It was a Sunday afternoon, late spring. The church was hosting a food drive, and I was restocking supplies in the back when I saw a girl sitting on the concrete steps outside, knees pulled to her chest. She couldn't have been more than 7, maybe 8. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for anything. She just stared ahead, eyes hollow, like she'd been staring for hours and hadn't seen a thing. I approached slowly, crouched down. "Hi," I said gently. "My name's Delara." She didn't answer. "You don't have to talk. That's okay." Still, nothing. I sat beside her, not touching, just close enough to share space. After a few minutes, I whispered, "I once was you." She turned then, just a little. Her lips parted like she might say something, but didn't. I stood, held out my hand. "Would you like to come in with me, just for a minute?" She hesitated, then reached up. I didn't ask for her name. It came later, on a Tuesday, when the social worker assigned to her case told me she had no relatives on record. No birth certificate, no school enrollment, just a first name on a sticky note attached to the blanket she was found with. Mira. Means wonder, I said aloud. I adopted her 3 months later. We didn't make it a big deal. No party, no cake, just a new room in my house, new shoes by the front door, and a soft blanket with her name embroidered on it in purple thread. Mira didn't speak much in those early weeks, but she watched everything. Me, the mailman, the trees changing color outside the window. She learned slowly, but deeply, like someone who knew silence wasn't empty. It was just another way to hold space. One evening, she brought me a journal I'd left on the table. She opened it to the back page and pointed to a line I'd written weeks earlier. They left me in the snow. I grew roots. She didn't ask what it meant, but I told her anyway. It means we get to start over, you and me. She nodded, placed her hand over mine. That night, after she'd gone to sleep, I closed that journal and opened a new one. The pages were blank, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't. Some people believe cutting someone out is the cleanest way to move forward, but what if silence becomes the sharpest weapon of all? This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your voice, your name, your space in the world, even when the people who were supposed to love you the most tried to take it all away. Have you ever felt erased by your own family? What would you do if the ones meant to protect you turned you into a ghost? If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because we have more powerful, real-life inspired stories coming your way.